And we are live here to chat about tonight's episode of Arrow, which was entitled Shifting Alliances. Ooh, foreshadowing. And this was episode 20 of season 6. And I brought along somebody who you might already recognize and is very necessary for tonight's episode. This is Jordan. Jordan, say hi.
Hello. It's good to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming back. I always like having you here, but I especially like having you here on episodes where I'm not totally on board right after it airs, and it kind of takes me a few minutes to process, and I kind of have to, get into the mindset of what the writers were thinking and what they were wanting. So that's where I'm at. So I'm glad you're here. So I'm going to let you kick us off with ratings. Having just watched this episode on a sort of scale of 1 to 5, what would you rate this episode and why?
All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and round up because
Okay.
and I'm gonna give it a 5. I'm gonna give it a full
Ooh.
5 stars, and this is the fifth episode of the past six that I've given that rating to. This season of Arrow, it started out a little rough for me, but they have been killing it recently. I loved this episode. I really did. I thought it was fantastic.
That's higher than I thought even you would give it. So I'm genuinely surprised. So I can kind of, trying to think through some of the things that you like. I can kind of see some aspects of tonight's episode that you would like. And then there were a couple things actually genuinely, and I was really inclined to give this a low rating, but there were a couple things in tonight's episode I really did, I want to say retroactively or retrospectively appreciate, but there can't really be too much retrospection because we just watched it like 10
Yeah,
minutes
it's only been a few.
prior. There were a few things I liked. Overall, I wasn't super on board. Before I get into my rating, though, let's see what the chat said. Stormy gives the episode 2.5 out of 5. Amanda gives it a 1 out of 5, says very, very bad writing. And Kanisha Barnes just gives it a thumbs down. Okay, so the chat is going to need the same kind of help that I need, Jordan. I, because watching it, I'm kind of right around where Stormy is at that 2.5 out of 5, which to me I would consider average. Like, I don't often rate things that high, anyways. What is it about this episode that to you continued that number 5 streak? Like, having just watched it, what are you still remembering in your mind that you're loving?
Yeah. Well, there's a few things. Diaz. I'm continuing to just love everything about Diaz. I've been loving him all season. Kirk Acevedo's performance, I've been loving all season. But then once we finally got that backstory last episode, and it
Mm-hmm.
continued to play into this episode. I mean, Laurel talking to Lance about, no, you don't see it. You don't see it in this guy's eyes. You don't see how he's not motivated by hate or anger. He's not even human. And I love
Mm-hmm.
seeing that continue in this episode. A scene that stuck out to me was his fight with Ali, and it was sort of, it showed you the contrast between him and Anatole, and in terms of
Right.
their the way they are as villains. Diaz has no rules. I mean, Anatole's got some honor, and Diaz is just like, he has no rules. He has no hesitation about stabbing Oliver when he's on the ground like that. And it's
Right.
just, you see it later with Laurel, and he stabs the book, showing her what he's going to do or what he would have done to Lance had Lance not complied. And it's
Right.
just like, I'm loving it. And that fight scene in particular reminded me of the Batman versus Bane fight in The Dark Knight
Oh.
Rises, where you don't have any score. They don't play any music, and it's just so intense. The Oliver and Diaz going at each other, and I loved it. I'm loving Diaz.
All right. Well, okay. Thinking about it that way, especially because I'm sort of dragging my feet when it comes to Diaz, I'm not sure I loved him. I will say they were pretty consistent in tonight's episode about making sure we understood that Diaz was willing to fight dirty. That, there's sort of this honor that Slade and Caden, James, and all of them have sort of had in the past that Diaz doesn't have. To me, it doesn't make me love Diaz as a villain, but it at least gives me this idea of who he is. And it's not just sort of a like, oh, the dragon, and that's sort of all we know about him. That does give me something in particular. You commented on the Siren character, and Siren and Anatole were really key in this episode because when the episode title is referencing shifting alliances, I can only assume that those are the two that they could be referencing, and it could be either or maybe both in different ways. Jumping into the chat to see what people think about that. Stormy says Siren is weak. Siren's character is just an inconsistent mess. Brian Perez says 1 out of 5 newbies had more screen time than 1 out of 5, comma, newbies had more screen time than the core characters. Yeah, the newbies did seem to have a bit more than the core characters. So let's go
That's
to
true,
that,
but
and
we've
then we'll.
seen them in a few episodes though, and that's why I sort of feel like it
Yeah,
made sense because we've shifted the focus away from them for a few episodes. So to
right.
me anyway, it felt natural for them to sort of have a little bit more time in the spotlight finally.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to get into though. That's a really good point. That's a strong defense for having a lot of newbies. We've been, I would say, gratefully without them, but give or take. I've been grateful we've had Renee gone, but Curtis and Dinah, they have their ups and downs. What
One
did you
thing.
think?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I
you're
was I was
fine.
going to point something out about the newbies real quick. In one of their scenes, in their sort of newbie cave,
Yeah,
whatever you want to call it, there's something that I caught on the screen. One of the members of the Quadrant
yeah.
is named Cyrus Broderick, and he's a
Okay.
character from the Green Arrow Rebirth run. He's a
Oh,
member of this organization called the Ninth Circle, and I don't
okay.
know whether that was just intended to be an Easter egg. The Ninth Circle is actually somewhat similar to the Quadrant in terms of them being sort of a secret society, sort of.
Hmm.
So I could see there being something where the Quadrant plays heavily in going forward, and maybe they're Arrow's version of the Ninth Circle from the comics, or we see Cyrus Broderick and we see that he's actually a member of the Ninth Circle, and they actually bring that into the show. So that was at the very least, it was a cool Easter egg, but I think it could be something more. So I wanted to point that out in one of the scenes with the newbies.
No, that's good to know, and that kind of adds dimension to this story for me because the whole idea of the quadrant, I wasn't really sure what they were trying to sell me with that, what that was supposed to add to Dragon's character. But knowing that it's supposed to, they're very intentionally creating this vibe of a secret society that is somewhat political as the counter to Oliver, who sort of has, in his own way, a secret society that is also sort of political, because that has been sort of the goal of the Team Arrow at this point, is to sort of retain control of the city, both as vigilantes. They've had their presence in the mayor's office, they've had their presence in the police force. And so that is a good counter, at least on paper, that makes it make more sense for me. Comma, however, I still have a few more points that I want you to sell me on, if you don't mind.
Sure,
And
I'll do my
I'm
best.
just gonna I'm just gonna jump in with a comment that Amanda has in the chat. She said, Diggle apologized to New Team Arrow. I'm so mad. What did you think of the fact that Mr. John Diggle apologized
I
to the
mean,
team in general, but specifically Renee?
when he did apologize, he was even saying like, I'm not saying that I he still said he didn't agree with their actions before, but sort of he's apologizing for the way things went down. And I think that's understandable. And same thing goes for when Felicity apologized to Curtis last episode. To me, it just feels like what they might not necessarily agree with what I'm calling them the outsiders, what the outsiders had done before. But it's like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like they're sort of taking the high road here, and saying, okay, let's
There.
try and move past this. And so that's the way I took it as, not necessarily that they're conceding that the outsiders were right in what they did, but just
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry that things got so out of hand and got out of control, and let's try and move past this. So I feel like they're sort of being the better people here almost by
Yeah.
apologizing.
Yeah, they definitely are. They're being the bigger person. I mean, I think they might be being a better person than I would be in that situation. I've been, my initial reaction always to be a bit taken aback by the fact that Diggle and Felicity are apologizing, because my initial interpretation is the writers think Diggle and Felicity are in the wrong and they're making them apologize. But I think it's a little more to it than that. I think it's not that they see Diggle and Felicity as in the wrong, it's that they see Diggle and Felicity as the bigger person, whereas Renee is more the type to be like, oh, okay, you apologize. So that means you're wrong. Like, let's go, and it kind of takes him a longer time to kind of figure out what's going on because he's kind of a teenager. Kanisha was talking about this as well in the chat. She said, why did Diggle apologize? First Felicity, now Diggle. It's like the writers forgot Renee was trying to get Oliver arrested and Curtis hacked the Diggle chip. Yeah, there's a laundry list of things the newbies need to apologize for. Are you okay with them sort of moving past that, or do you think the newbies will come around to apologizing as well?
Personally, I'm okay with them sort of moving past that. I mean, it really does show the maturity that Felicity and Diggle have, that they were the ones to apologize. And I feel like, I mean, maybe the newbies will apologize too. But the way it's going right now, I think that Renee might give up the vigilante thing. And I don't know about Curtis and Dinah, so I'm curious to see where they take this and whether there is some sort of reconciliation. It's interesting. It seems to be that there's a reconciliation to some point between Diggle and the Outsiders. I mean, they're working together right now, which surprised me, but I thought was pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I would say of anybody, Diggle. I mean, obviously, we saw Curtis and Felicity sort of patch things up last week, which I also found unsatisfactory because of everything Curtis has done to Diggle and all that. And now with Diggle patching things up, it just sort of seems like there's this consistent trend of the OTA people being the bigger people and patching things up. And NTA has not really apologized, although I did find it interesting that NTA, or I guess more specifically Dinah, was anybody else involved, offered Diggle a position on their team. That was interesting, which he turned it down. Did you like seeing him with Argus?
Yeah, I think it's a really cool new place for them to take the character because it's not like anything we've seen Diggle do previously on the show, and so
Right.
it's kind of cool to see him as the leader. I don't know how long it's going to last, but at least temporarily to see him as the leader of Argus. And most what I like about it is that it's isolated Oliver. Now I like Oliver working with Team Arrow, but it's cool as a throwback, for a little while to be seeing him out in the field alone again. I mean, that scene at the beginning of the episode of him in Russia was really cool. So I'm liking seeing Oliver on his own, and so if the way to do that was to take Diggle and put him with Argus for a while, I mean, I'm cool with that, and I'm excited to see if they do some more interesting stuff with that.
Yeah. So one of the, I guess, going back to the theme, I agree. I think it's been kind of interesting to see Diggle with Argus, even though I kind of dragged my feet about that because I did not love the episode where Diggle left the team. I was kind of up and down on that. And you and my co-host on Arrow Squad, Martin, kind of had to talk me into that one as well. We got there in the end because I actually did kind of like seeing him with Argus. But well, first, let's say Shayna in the chat says, "Hello, I'm only here because Cammy is a warrior for sticking with DC TV all this time." Thank you, Shayna. And there's sort of three characters that are getting some mention here in the chat as to whether or not they're good or bad. So Anatole, Stormy says, "I want a redemption arc for Anatole. He has an actual relationship with Oliver. It's not like Siren's weird fake relationship with Lance." And then there's a few other comments and have been before about the Laurel and Lance storyline. Kanisha wants to know what you think of the Laurel and Lance storyline. And then there are some about Renee and Renee getting any form of redemption. Amanda says he won't give up because he's all is well with his daughter. Whereas Stormy says Renee needs to die. His attitude is horrible. Where are you at with these three that are, I mean, there's two that are quite clearly, up and down as to what side they're on, and that's Anatole and Siren. I have said before that I think Renee is reading more as a villain, but more of a villain from the inside. Where are you at with these three? Are they good? Are they bad? Where do you want them to be?
Okay, all right. I guess I'll start with the first one, Anatole. Um,
Yeah.
I've really liked everything they've done with Anatole on the show. I think that I thought it was interesting this episode again to see the contrast between him and Diaz, but I still don't feel like we've gotten to the point because Anatole is the KG beast in the comics. He's a serious villain, and I feel
Mhm.
like we've only just scratched the surface of that. Like when he had the falling out with Oliver last season, I felt like that was
Mhm.
the start of that, and I feel like I wouldn't want them to redeem him already. If they're going to do that, I'm okay with that, but I want to see get more time with him truly as a villain. So that's where I stand on Anatole. Siren. Um, I know you're going to disagree with me here, Cammy, but I'm I'm on board this redemption for her train. I think that this episode it was really interesting to see her and Lance sort of um the interactions between them. I really do think we saw it last episode. Laurel not being totally on board with a lot of what Diaz was doing, thinking he was going too far. We're seeing more of that this
Mhm.
episode. She continued to feel that way. She's clearly intimidated by Diaz. She's like, okay, this guy's unhinged. She clearly is not on board with the lengths he's going to, and I think that she is loyal to Lance. And I think that they talked about them basically protecting each other this episode. I think we're going to see that, and I feel like they're sort of foreshadowing. I think Lance is going to wind up dying at the end of the season. I think that Laurel is basically. I think that she is going to get redeemed. And that she's going to basically, I think it's going to be the reverse of season 4, because Lance brought up when Earth One World died. I think it's going to sort of be the reverse, where she's going to have to see Lance die. And I think
Yeah.
that that could put her on the path to redemption. Dad L on the most recent episode of Arrow Squad brought something up that I thought was interesting, which was the idea that Laurel could maybe not be fully redeemed, but sort of be an anti-hero like the Huntress. I think we'd see that sort of her working with Team Arrow, maybe not at first being completely on the same page as them, but trying to do the right thing, even if she's maybe not completely with them. So I do want redemption for her, and I do think that's what's coming. So that's where I am on her. And then the third character was
Renee.
Renee. Renee, I'm just confused about what they're doing with him. Like and not in a bad way. Like I'm intrigued by it. I'm just not sure where they're going. Like I said, I speculated earlier. Like I think that maybe they'll wind up having him hang up the suit and not be a vigilante anymore. But then again, the way this episode ended, it sounded like, I mean, Zoe took finding out about him being a vigilante a lot better than William took it with Oliver. So maybe he'll stick around. I'm not. I haven't written. I'll be honest. I have not written Renee off the way you have. I still like him as a
I've
character. So,
so written Renee off.
when he was first introduced in season 5, I wasn't on board with him. But then once the Spectre of the Gun episode happened, that changed my stance on him. And ever since, I've liked him. So that's where I am on those three.
I feel like, I mean, we're not polar opposites on our stance on Anatole, but I feel like we're kind of polar opposites on our stance on everyone else. So
Yeah,
Anatoly,
yeah.
I would be fine with seeing him redeemed. I just don't think he needs to be redeemed. And I don't know that it would do a service to his character to be redeemed, but I think it's been a disservice to his character to see him working under Dragon. So it would be up from that at least to see him, not necessarily be redeemed, but maybe side with Oliver and then part separate ways and do separate things. With Siren, I do disagree. And I think most of the chat does too. The reason why I would like Siren to stay evil is because everything that you described following Siren becoming good is not what the show would do. I think I just bumped the mic. I hope I didn't deafen you guys. It's not what the show would do because the show has already had a not evil version of her. And, the writing for her was quite up and down, more down than up. And then they killed her. So if they were to, the fact that Siren was even able to come back and be something different and contribute something different is because she was evil and quite a powerful evil as well. And a little bit different kind of evil than what we saw with the Earth X evil Laurel, who just showed up recently on The Flash, but similar in some ways. And it's not motivated by some of the typical motivations that we've seen of villains on this show before. And one of the things we've seen Siren go through, which I think is interesting in setting her up for, if they choose to take it, a little bit more interesting route than redemption, is that she's always been under other villains as sort of the muscle, as sort of a henchman or a minion. And I think she wants to sort of be in charge or at least not be under other people's thumb. And what I don't want to see them do for her to get there is to redeem her, because I feel like that would still translate as being under somebody else's thumb, because she's not going to be redeemed and then be a star hero in this city. There's a dozen other heroes in line who would be quote unquote star heroes before her, right? She would just be a bit of an anti-hero, like you're suggesting, pop up now and again, like Huntress. But the show doesn't like, they don't have a good track record with writing that kind of thing. I would prefer to see her manipulating both Diaz and Lance and turn on both of them and try to take over as the bigger bad in the end, because I think she's set up to be a more interesting villain than them. But will that happen? Probably not. Will yours happen? Probably better odds of that. But we'll see. We'll see. Jumping into the chat to see what the others think. Brian Perez says, I don't get why Siren is scared of Diaz. One scream to his face and he's done. Very good point. Stormy says, why would anyone on Team Arrow trust her? She's tried to kill them for 2 years. And Stormy goes on to point out that Siren complained about Diaz rolling over last episode. And that's in reference to her not being okay with his means. But then also, we've seen her do some things in the past that are just as savage as what Dragon has. She has the capacity to be just as much of a sort of star villain as he has. Do you like seeing her as a star villain? Like, are you open to that sort of thing, or you really want to see her as a hero again?
I mean, I've enjoyed. I think Katie Cassidy has done a great job playing a villainous version of Laurel, both this version and, as you alluded to, the Earth X version that we just saw this week on The Flash.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that I prefer. I mean, not. I think I would prefer if they did redeem her. I
Yeah.
definitely. As a villain, I like Diaz better. I'm
Mhm.
just gonna. I know we're on different pages there, but
Yeah.
I like Diaz. I like Diaz better as a villain. I mean, like I said, I like Laurel as a villain too. But I just think her redemption story could be really compelling, and that I think that's what I'd most want to see. If I had it my way, that's what would happen. So
It's okay that we have different opinions because that gives depth to the analysis. That means
absolutely,
we
absolutely.
get both sides covered. So Ermac in the chat says, I could see Black Siren joining Legends of Tomorrow. So that brings us to sort of what we'd like to see going forward. So fantastic transition there, Ermac in the chat. I am really curious because the season is kind of drawing to a close, and we have sort of seen some spoilers, and this is a very spoiler friendly show. So I'm going to mention spoilers. If you don't want to hear them, then that's your warning. We've seen spoilers that Miss Sarah Lance shows up in the Arrow finale. We've seen spoilers that Tommy or some version of Tommy or some version of some of the different series is going to show up. I think we even just saw that in the promo quite recently,
Yeah,
like 20 minutes ago.
yeah.
And we have some other sort of shots that, they've shared of somebody might be in a hospital bed, but we don't know who. There might be two different people in a hospital bed. Where do you want to see the characters go from here? Where do you want to see them end up in the finale? Is this going to be one of the finales where we get a happy ending or a sad ending? And then, like Ermac mentioned, are there some characters that we've seen so far this season that you think might venture onto other shows, such as Black Siren joining her sister, sort of sister, on Legends of Tomorrow?
Well, I think that's actually I didn't think about that, but that's a good theory because yeah, we do know Sarah's coming back for the finale, so I mean that could maybe she recruits Black Siren and brings her over to Legends. Personally, I'd prefer to see Black Siren on Arrow for her to stay on Arrow, but I mean I wouldn't be opposed to that necessarily. So that could be a way that they go. I just saw Tommy. I didn't know prior to seeing the promo that Tommy was coming back in some capacity. So I saw that in the
Yeah.
promo and I was like, whoa, that'll be pretty cool. Depending on how they do it, I mean, I'm not. I have a big thing against resurrections in comic book media. I think it's an overused trope, and I think that it takes away from death initially, and it basically reduces the stakes going forward. Which is why I was not a big fan of the fact that we just found out there's two more Lazarus pits. I'm not real happy about that, but
I
uh,
can tell you, I'm pretty sure how Tommy comes back, if you're okay
okay,
with a
yeah, go
spoiler.
ahead, please, please.
I'm pretty sure it's human target. That rumor and people
Okay.
have seen things on set, and this isn't like super confirmed, but I'm even seeing in the chat right now people mentioning human target is what's going on with the Tommy thing.
That I would be totally on board with then. That yeah, that gets a thumbs up for me. So I am excited to see him again. I always love when Colin Donald comes back. It was great to see him as the Earth X Tommy in the crossover this year. I'm excited for that. Really towards the end of the season, I mean, I'm wondering if we're going to see maybe now that Team Arrow is sort of broken up into different factions. I wonder if going into next season, maybe we'll see a scenario where because we know Arsenal's coming back. I wonder if we could
Mm-hmm.
see a scenario where for a while we just have Green Arrow and Arsenal working together in the field. Um,
Yeah.
and I
I've
think that could
seen some theories of that happening or of Arsenal slash Roy coming and taking the Green Arrow's place for a while he's in prison, perhaps.
interesting. Interesting. Okay, that I mean it makes sense. Yeah, because now obviously at the end of this episode we saw Oliver get arrested, and one thing I'd point out about that is we got a reference to Gene Loring, who has been his attorney
Mhm.
several times on the show, and in the comic I keep waiting for them to do something with her more than just being his attorney, because in the comics she's Ray Palmer's wife. So I every time Gene Loring shows up, and she's only had like little cameo roles in Arrow, it's like I look at her and I'm like, maybe it's just an Easter egg for us, but I always think it's cool. I think it's cool when she shows up, but I keep wondering if they might do something more with her. So
I remember you mentioning that on the podcast, and I thought that was so interesting. It is really interesting to sort of pick up how many comic Easter eggs they've left on the show. Even for me, who I'm not sort of ride or die on the comics the way you are, which is kind of why I bring you on so you can kind of inform us all of this. But even the character Bethany Snow, who plays the news reporter on Arrow, A, that's a comic book character, and B, that's actually one of the characters who's made the most appearances on this show, more than I think, more than Sarah Lance, more than the Al Ghul sisters. Like, she's really up there in terms of appearances, and a lot of times we don't notice that because it's just like, oh, it's just a news reporter, but it's like, that's a news reporter who's been on this show consistently for 6 years now, has had tons of appearances consistently, and is a comic book character, and at any time they could make a story out of that. So it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's true. And I remember you pointing out, I think on a podcast episode, that she's one of the characters who appeared most in the show. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, but it's just you don't always it doesn't always register that would be the case just because she has such a small role. But yeah, it's
Right.
pretty cool.
Yeah, Amanda in the chat mentioned Jean Loring is sort of a name drop Easter egg, the way Felicity Smoke was supposed to be just sort of a name drop Easter egg. Felicity Smoke in the comics is a businesswoman. She's somebody's aunt. Whose aunt is she?
Ronnie Raymond, I believe.
Yeah, Ronnie Raymond's
Yeah.
aunt. And, that was supposed to be just a cute little nod. And then she returned. And so I'm always kind of wondering if there'll be other little comic book Easter egg name drops that will end up turning into more of a
Hey,
full
well,
fledged.
keep an eye out for Cyrus Broderick, like I brought up on the
Yeah.
with the quadrant members. So that I'm telling you, that could be something.
I didn't see anybody else mentioning that. So you, me, and those watching this will be one of the few in the loop on that one. Other bits
Awesome.
of other bits of excitement in the chat. Stormy says, I want to see a scene with Colin and Emily. We never got that in season 1. She also says, I think Oliver is trying to keep Felicity out of the Green Arrow business, but it's going to come back to bite him. I could see her trying to go after Diaz in some way and getting hurt. Talmanis says Felicity Smoke was Ronnie's mother-in-law, not aunt. Oh, I misspoke. That was a good correction. Thank you for that. Yeah, I do think Oliver trying to keep Felicity and everybody out of it is going to come back to bite him. But Felicity is one we did not see her very much tonight. She's sort of doing exactly as Oliver told her to do, and she's at home with Reza and William and staying safe. But I mentioned last week that when Felicity gets worried, I get a little bit of, and you may not like this or you may like this reference. I mentioned she gets a little bit of like this Lois Lane vibe where she gets very hyper focused and she wants to help and she does things actively to help, but like she's going to get in trouble doing it.
I can see
I know
that.
you feel very strongly about Lois Lane, so I don't know if you're okay with that reference, but do
No,
you get the
no.
sense that she's going to get kidnapped as well?
I am a Klana shipper, but that
Right.
doesn't mean I don't love the character of Lois Lane, and I definitely see where you're coming from on that
Yeah.
with that reference. So yeah.
Do you foresee Felicity going into some sort of danger by the end of the season? Is she going to get
I mean,
kidnapped?
I could see it. I mean, Diaz, like I said, Diaz. I mean, I don't know what Diaz is going to do. He's so unhinged that it's like he has there's no lengths that he wouldn't go to. So I mean, I could see that. And if Felicity does get in his crosshairs, then she's in big trouble because he's a formidable foe, as we've seen these last 2 episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's interesting, and it was a little bit ominous to see so little of her this episode. Somebody pointed out in the chat it's only 21 seconds of her. That in this type of show almost always comes right before somebody's going to get kidnapped, injured, in the crosshairs, something's going to happen terribly. And I just remember last season they made a big deal about how Prometheus was a bit hyper focused on Felicity. Felicity was actually the last word that Prometheus ever said before he died. And I'm like, or is our guy Dragon gonna be that smart too? But we are out of time. We've gone the full 30 minutes. But if anybody watching wants to pester you with more questions about the comics, get you to explain some of the little Easter eggs, where can they find you? Where can they find more of what you do with comics?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm always happy to chat about this stuff. So you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at ThatFanJordanV. And I also have a podcast. It's called Multiverse Musings, a DC Comics podcast. You can find that on iTunes, TuneIn, Podbean. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And his stuff's pretty cool. And I have his
Well,
description,
thank you.
his information in the description down below as well. And you guys already know how to find me. Also, if any of you happen to be up in Calgary, Canada, I'll be speaking via like satellite long distance on a panel about Arrow, Flash Legends, Supergirl, everything this Friday night. So I'll tweet about that as well. Other than that, you know where to find me. Same old, same old. And it was good to talk to everybody. I really appreciated all the comments in the chat, whether you were rating it low like me or high like Jordan. I appreciated all of it. Come chat with us about it on Twitter more if you want. And I will see you all next week for episode 21. Wow, we're getting close to the end there. Bye bye.
Wrap it up.